it's the helping students to listen closely in an analytical way, because if you can't listen analytically, if you don't have good training, then it can be difficult to change the way that you speak. Taylor Swift changed the way that she spoke when she moved to Nashville because she wanted to be a country star. And then she moved to New York and her speech has changed again. But I don't think people know that received pronunciation means it's the pronunciation that's considered to be socially acceptable and the one you want to aspire to. So, I mean, I'd like to be able to get over it, but I think it's so established and so out there that it's difficult to move people on from that terminology.
Welcome to the PronSIG podcast. PronSIG, the IATEFL Pronunciation Special Interest Group, has been at the forefront of pronunciation teaching, both in theory and in practice, since 1986. We support teachers around the world in developing their knowledge and confidence in pronunciation pedagogy and fill the gap often left by a lack of teacher training through a wide range of online and face-to-face events, including workshops, conferences, webinars, and book clubs, and publications such as our biannual journal, Speak Out, and our monthly blog. In this podcast, we interview key figures in PronSIG history and the wider pronunciation field to provide our listeners the chance to get to know them and their careers a little more personally in this conversation-style format. In this episode, I speak to none other than Jane Setter. Jane is Professor of Phonetics at the University of Reading in the UK and teaches on the annual summer course in English Phonetics at University College London. She co-edited the Cambridge English Pronouncing Dictionary, the Cambridge Handbook of Phonetics, and the Oxford Handbook of Language and Prejudice, and was the author of the popular science book Your Voice Speaks Volumes. Her academic interests include teaching and learning English pronunciation, speech prosody in children from atypical populations, and features of the phonology of post-colonial Englishes such as Hong Kong and Malay speaker English. She has been a long-time contributor to IATEFL PronSIG, including a stint as coordinator, and she has spoken at many PronSIG events and contributed articles for publication in our biannual journal, Speak Out. In this episode, some of the topics we discussed include how she got into pronunciation and phonetics, her teaching of phonetics and speech analysis, how she was involved with PronSIG, the impact of Jennifer Jenkins' work, the appropriateness of the term RP and its standardized symbols. We talk about the intrusive W and Y and R. She talks about her book, Your Voice Speaks Volumes, and finally we discuss the Happy Vowel Song. We're very excited to have her here on the podcast, so we hope you enjoy the episode. Let's go.
Okay, good morning, Jane. It's very nice to have you along this morning. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
That's good. So you're at work at the moment. Where's work? Is that at Reading University?
Yes, that's correct. Reading University.
Okay. And what are you working on these days? What are you mostly focused on with your time?
Teaching.
Yeah?
Yes,
okay.
Teaching students. That's what I do. And
Who are
admin.
Your students?
those are my chief roles. Marking stuff. That's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, okay. So who are your students? They're studying phonetics or applied linguistics or?
We've got several programs. So we have undergraduate programs in English language and linguistics and postgraduate programs in applied linguistics and teaching English to speakers of other languages.
Okay, fantastic. So you're very, very busy with all of that then, I guess. And how long have you been working at Reading University?
Since 2001.
Yeah, okay. And has the student base changed a lot over that time? Is the teaching itself quite different?
I'd say student support has changed a lot over that time.
Yeah.
We have a lot more students who are presenting as needing reasonable adjustments, for example, in assessment. And student support has changed a great deal over the time that I've been working here. But in terms of the actual things that we do with students, apart from having to make adjustments for students who need them, generally speaking, it's in the world of teaching phonetics and phonology anyway, it's very similar.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. And what are some of the most enjoyable things that you're teaching at the moment to the students? What subjects or parts of it do you enjoy most?
Well, this semester I'm teaching a module called Analysing Speech, and I'm training students to do acoustic and auditory phonetics, and so perception and production. They have an oral exam where we do a general oral phonetics test, and I train them to use PRAT, which is, I'm sure you know what PRAT is, a software for very basic analysis. And then if they want to go on and develop that more later on, they can. So this is a second year module, and I get students who do dissertations with me in the final year, and they've got the skills to do the speech analysis that they need. And if they need to learn how to put scripts in and so on, apply scripts and or do other sort of work with it, then that's something we develop while they're doing their dissertations.
That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. I can. I've got an audio engineering background actually, so I can imagine how that can be very, very useful in terms of speech analysis to look at the frequency range of production. And I imagine that different vowels and different consonants can be represented, of course. What's the name of the software again? Sorry, I have seen it, I believe, but
yeah, it's PRAT, PRAAT, which is Dutch for speak, and was developed in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. All right, we're going to start with how you got into pronunciation teaching, I suppose. Now, I've heard that you, and I know you've written about this as well, that your dad at a young age used to correct your pronunciation a lot because he wanted you to have a specific kind of English accent, as he thought that would help you in your life and career. But how did that lead into getting into teaching and then continuing into maybe focusing on pronunciation?
It's one of those things that I just kind of fell into because I found it interesting, really.
Yeah.
So when I was doing my undergraduate program, every summer I would teach at various English language schools in the area that I grew up. So there's quite a lot of places, particularly on the south coast of England, that have language schools in the summer. I mean, this happens all over the country. Places like Oxford and Cambridge, of course, have them, and other places like that. But we had quite a big industry, and still do, in my area of the country, where we'd get people coming over for summer schools, and we'd get adult classes and teenage kids whose parents had sent them abroad to get shot of them for a period in the summer, like a kind of summer camp, I guess. And I was teaching at quite a small school, and we had a smaller number of students in the classes. So the schools that I started teaching at earlier on had larger numbers of students, but when I moved to the smaller school and it had mostly adults and smaller groups, I started to get more interested in pronunciation teaching and looking at what sort of materials there were, and supporting people to make choices about their accents and if they wanted to change the way they spoke. Of course, back then, so this was the 80s, it was all about being correct or not being correct. So whether you were getting a sound right or not, rather than whether you were being intelligible. So that was where all the work was coming from at the time, really. So we'd spend time talking about that and practicing pronunciation using various materials that were available, or various books and so on. And then when I was doing my degree at the same time, I just found phonetics and speech production and pronunciation and the auditory and production part of it rather than the acoustic part of it. And I just found that to be something I could do very well. And so it sort of all knitted together. And then I spent 2 years in Japan after I finished my degree. And I was at a small language school in Japan teaching English. And when I came back from that, I did a master's degree in linguistics and English language teaching. And I got back into phonetics there. And so then I started working on the Cambridge English Pronouncing Dictionary. I haven't got a copy of it to wave at you, I'm afraid. I must have taken it home. Oh, you've got one
right here.
That's it. That's the one. So I started working on that with Peter Roach after I finished my master's degree. He was he asked a colleague who'd been supervising phonetics dissertations who he thought would be a good person to work on that, and she recommended me. So that's when I started working on that. And again, that's much more about adherence to a British or American kind of reference accent, looking at it from that point of view. And eventually I ended up in Hong Kong, at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, teaching there and teaching phonetics and pronunciation analysis and supporting teachers to understand some of the issues with that. When I came back from Hong Kong, I got involved with the PronSIG. So that's it really. And I was very lucky to coordinate the pronunciation special interest group to start with Barbara Bradford, who was a lovely person, had written this great intonation book.
Okay.
And then Jonathan Marks.
When was that? Sorry, when were you the coordinator?
This is a good question. It was after 2001, and it was fairly soon after that, because the coordinator at the time, Michael Vaughan Rees, I think, had decided to step down. So we were sort of deciding what we could do to make sure it didn't die as a special interest group. And Barbara and I took it on, but I couldn't tell you how soon after 2001 that was. I'm sure you've got some historical timeline somewhere. But Barbara and I did it for a few years, and then Jonathan Marks and I took it on. And then after that, I kind of moved into more of a background role with it. And then eventually IATEFL said, you can't be on the committee anymore, go away. And so I had to step down from the committee.
Right. Okay. I'm interested to ask you about the teaching that you were doing in the summer courses around England and sort of south of England. I've been in that kind of environment in Australia, and I noticed that some teachers would take really well to pronunciation teaching, and then you get comments from others like, oh, I don't really teach pronunciation at all. You know, like it's either an interest or not an interest, you know. But I'm interested, what is it about you, I think, that led you to developing an interest in that? You know, is it a musical background thing, or is it just something that your ear picked up on and you realized that you were able to help students with it?
I mean, like I say, it was really organic. I can't put my finger on anything that took me into that particularly. But I mean, because my dad had always picked me up on the way that I speak, and I don't speak RP. I'm really seriously, I don't. And people seem to think that I do, but I really don't. Well, I mean, not RP speakers in the UK, they would not believe that I spoke RP. But I have what's called Southern Standard British English, or I mean, you know, it has other descriptions, but Southern Standard British English, and because he'd picked me up on things like grammar and speech and so on, I was interested in the sort of in those nitty-gritty areas. And it was just something that I found interesting. So if people ask me about it, then I'd say, okay, let's work on that. And we'd spend some time thinking about what their aims and goals were and what they wanted to do, or we'd pick some exercises. So they'd say, I want to work on this. So I'd find something maybe interactive to do with them, or, you know, depending on what sort of materials that we had, or we'd make things up, or they'd say, I really like the way so-and-so sounds. So we'd spend some time listening to how a person spoke. And that was, I mean, we were using video recorders back then. It was donkeys years ago. And, you know, making videos of people reading the news perhaps, and then listening to that and mirroring. And, you know, it's the helping students to listen closely in an analytical way to how they sound and how the target person, that if they want to sound like, if we were doing that sort of exercise, it's being able to listen analytically. Because if you can't listen analytically, if you don't have good training to listen analytically, then it can be difficult to change the way that you speak. And this can be approached in a number of different ways. But things like close listening and all the work I'd done on phonetics and taking the IPA exam and things like that, it enabled me to think about listening very closely, ear training we call it, which always makes me think about your ear jumping through a hoop or something like that. But we call it ear training. So actually learning to listen really, really carefully and in detail. And So yeah, that was something I worked with students on, but
I guess fundamentally you must have realized that change was possible, right? Like a lot of students don't realize, or even perhaps teachers, that with effort, focused effort, you can make those changes, and you experience that from a young age. So
you've got to have people who are motivated. I mean, I was motivated because I used to get such disapproval from my dad. But you've got to have people who are motivated to change, and that can come in a number of different ways. People can be motivated because they want to do well in an exam, or they can be motivated because they want to integrate with a particular group, or they can say I don't want to integrate with that group, in which case they don't want to change some aspect of themselves, which could be pronunciation. And I had a PhD student who worked on Polish migrants to the UK who were based in Reading, and he found that some wanted to fit in and others didn't, and the ones that wanted to fit in more into general British society might have been more likely to change the way they spoke. So there are lots of different motivations for this, and if people ask you about it, then in some ways you're more likely to get a result. But in the 80s it wasn't popular to focus on micro skills like that. It was all it's the communicative sort of thing. It was all about sort of picking it up as you went along, and making sure that you could have conversations and not thinking so much about the detail. It was a different sort of a different time. People were sort of, we're going to do this sort of method now, we're not going to do that. And there was the direct method. I mean, it was all a very different kind of time. So if you did get someone who came to you and said, I want to work on this, then you had to go away and seek specific materials, which were there, but they weren't the kind of thing that we were presented with in classrooms at the time, until Headway came along, and then that had Headway pronunciation. So that kind of highlighted it as a separate book, which sort of highlighted it.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask you a question, maybe slightly provocative here? How do you feel about the term RP?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned and outdated. I think people tend to identify it with Southern-type British accents. It's sort of what it means to you, doesn't it? I mean, for me, it's just another accent. How do I feel about it?
Well, I guess also, specifically that the word received comes from well received in society, right?
Yeah,
like it was the accent to sort of try and punch above your weight a little bit and work your way up in society, and that stuck.
But I don't think people know what that meaning of received is anymore. I don't think people know that received pronunciation means it's the pronunciation that's considered to be socially acceptable and the one you want to aspire to. I don't think we use the word received like that in modern parlance. So, if people see RP and they think of an upper class person speaking with a particular accent, or I mean, Peter Roach was very keen to move away from RP, and he wanted to use BBC English, which I don't know, that also has its difficulties, but it was sort of more encompassing. And, we got Network American was what James Hartman wanted to use. So the sort of accent that you hear on network television in the US. It was that kind of clearly spoken broadcast accent that we wanted to describe. But I mean, it does tend to gravitate towards descriptions of received pronunciation, and you can still describe Southern Standard British English mostly within that framework without having to move away from it too much. Sure. But of course, from a phonemic point of view, there are differences in the ways that some phoneme sounds are produced in the accents. So, I mean, I'd like to be able to get over it, but I think it's so established and so out there that it's difficult to move people on from that terminology.
Yeah. I guess a lot of the literature doesn't seem to use the term so much anymore. They'll use Southern Standard British English or it's moving in that direction, but you do still get people who think of RP as being the British accent without even knowing what RP stands for or what it really means. Or, I mean, we are getting, we're trying to decolonize the curriculum, so move away from
accents that are associated with colonialism, and that's definitely going to be one of them. So I don't know, but how do I feel about it? I think it's time that we stop using it, but I think it's so ingrained that it's hard to get away from it.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can take the conversation to PronSIG a little bit. Of course, this is the PronSIG 40th anniversary podcast. So you said that early on in your career, or when you came back to England, you discovered PronSIG. What do you remember about the early days for you in terms of PronSIG?
I'm trying to remember how I got involved in it in the first place. And I think it was because I joined IATEFL. I can't remember how long ago I joined IATEFL. Certainly in the 90s, because I've got speak outs that go back that far. But I can't remember. I must have joined it when I was in Hong Kong, I guess. And I remember reading some speak outs and thinking that they were interesting and had things to say that I thought were important and so on. And then I started getting involved with the pronunciation special interest group. I haven't been to the IATEFL conference very much. I think I did go when I came back from Hong Kong because I'd just done my PhD, which was on speech rhythm in Hong Kong English. And I wanted to present that at various conferences, and I presented it at IATEFL, and that was so that would have been 2001-ish, 2002, because I came back in 2001. And the audience was tiny because it wasn't about teaching techniques. It was a research paper. And I thought about getting involved with the research SIG, but actually I've always been more interested in teaching than research. So I aligned myself with the pronunciation special interest group and got talking to people who were in the group. And and then there was this opportunity to take over as coordinator because they couldn't find anybody else, basically. And so it was hard work back then. I think since it's been taken over by people like Gemma and so on, it's really gone from strength to strength. But we were struggling with it. We didn't really have social media in the sort of way that
it must have been hard without the internet. It
was really hard work, and we had good things to say in the in Speak Out. Loads of really good articles, practical tips, all sorts of really good things. But actually, trying to promote the SIG was hard work. And we had a core of people who were very loyal and would come back and wanted to talk to us about it and so on. But actually getting into the whole social media side of it was hard. And I think I may have set up the first Facebook page for it years ago.
Okay.
There's a chance I did that. I set up a whole load of Facebook pages, and I think I may have set the PronSIG one up, but I can't be sure about that. I'm sure Gemma will tell me.
You've had some other notable milestones in your career apart from that one. So
well, but it was oh my goodness, we've got to do something. And at the time it didn't take off, and you're trying to not having those skills because I'm not a native of this sort of thing. I wasn't. It's something that came later, and being a social media native, it's very different from the sort of background I had, where it just wasn't something that you did. So help set it up, get it going, and then I believe I'm totally willing to be contradicted about this, because like I say, I set up several Facebook pages, and now it's all kind of moved on to Instagram, and there are other kinds of ways of doing it, and we've got podcasts and so on. We just didn't have that back then, so it was very hard to keep it going, and it felt really like you were pushing a large rock up a steep hill for a lot of the time. So when I stepped down from it, eventually, I think Jonathan overlapped with somebody else for a while, and excuse me, I just rubbish at names, so I've forgotten everybody's name. But it kind of started to grab a bit of steam, and then it really took off with people like Katerina taking it over, and Gemma getting involved, and various other people who were involved in it. So it was good to see it get such traction. But yes, I got involved with it back then, and I think Jennifer Jenkins was a member of the PronSIG at the time, and then she and I ended up writing the article for language teaching, which on pronunciation, which is something that is kind of a review article that seems to get cited now. That came out in 2005. God, it's that long ago. I just kind of remained in the scene from that. But I think the main reason that I've been identified so much with pronunciation is because of the English Pronouncing Dictionary, because that was a big seller and it was out there, and my name's on it. I'm not the first one that I did. I got taken on as a proper editor, let's say, after the first the first edition that we did together. But yes, I think probably it's more that than anything else.
Can I ask you about you mentioned that it was very sort of RP focused pronunciation teaching, throughout the 80s and 90s. But then obviously Jennifer Jenkins' work came out, and I think her book was released in 2001. Mm-hmm. And how do you perceive the shift into a more English for international communication in terms of pronunciation and the focus on pronunciation teaching in the 90s and through the period when her work was published?
To start, well, I think even now, actually, it can cause difficulties, because if you know what accent you're aiming for with if you're a teacher and you know that you are going for a specific accent and that it's this one because this is the prestige accent and this is the one that is in the materials that are from Britain largely, it kind of gives you confidence, at least. I mean, that a lot of teachers don't have confidence in addressing pronunciation, but you kind of know exactly what it is you're doing. And I think with the lingua franca core and the subsequent work on English intelligibility in English and English as a global language and so on. I mean, for me, that's got to be the way that it's going. There's no question about this. I don't think that I should be advocating for RP. I'm certainly not advocating for it, but it makes it less tangible, I think, for some teachers to know what to focus on. On the other hand, it makes it, I mean, I've had this discussion with teachers in the past. On the other hand, it sort of makes it better because we know which features, not just from Jenny's study, but from other work that was done to test that hypothesis. We know from studies that have been done that if you do focus on mostly consonants, and there are a few things that don't need focus on as much as others, and central vowels, for example. So she has that in, but otherwise, it's vowel quality, she says, is less important than quantity. I'm not entirely sure about that, but you can see where she's coming from. If you do that, then it frees you up in a lot of ways not to focus on things that are just aiming towards a particular accent. So the idea is that if you focus on those things, it will help to make your students more intelligible, rather than focusing on, achieving a certain accent. And I had a PhD student who compared teaching a sort of traditional model and teaching with materials based on the lingua franca core and, pre-tests and post-tests and so on, to see which speakers were perceived better. And he didn't actually find that there was much difference in how they were assessed. In fact, the
perceived better. Are you talking about intelligibility or comprehensibility?
Yeah. Well, if you've got naive listeners, so people who aren't pronunciation teachers, and he had a group of people rate the speakers before he did the training with them, and then taught them pronunciation over a series of weeks, and then did a post test, and then did a delayed post test, and he actually found that the post test, there was no great difference in whether people were taught with a lingua franca core based syllabus or whether they were taught with a SSBE RP type based syllabus. So that kind of says there's no disadvantage to picking one or the other, and certainly there's no disadvantage to going for a lingua franca core based perspective, because it's not a deficit model, if you like. We're not kind of taking things away. We're actually saying we're getting the same kind of results. And when he did the delayed post test, he actually found that the speakers that did the lingua franca core, I think they slightly did better than the ones that had done the traditional model. Now, sadly, we haven't managed to publish this for all sorts of reasons that I won't go into. But it was a really interesting piece of work, and I was really glad to see this, because I think some teachers might be hesitant to use a lingua franca core base because it doesn't look like you're going for a prestige model. But if it makes the speakers equally as intelligible, and it allows you to focus on things that are going to do that, then I'm in favour of it for so many reasons. But I can see how it might be causing conflicts in some areas if you've got language policies that focus on this. I understand that IELTS, for example, testing the spoken test has moved away from adherence to native speaker norms, but whatever native speaker means, but we still have people who are testing those things who might have those opinions, and so therefore it's a really, really tricky area. I think it's something that we're still moving through. But from my perspective, absolutely, I would go for a lingua franca core approach, and I think we need to be flexible, but also, if possible, depending on the kind of setting you're in, we need to take the needs and desires of the learner into account. So, if they want to sound like a general American speaker or a Southern British Standard or RP speaker, if that's what they want, if they perceive that as being important, then I don't think it's my job to talk them out of it. But you might have different options if you're teaching one-to-one than if you're teaching a group of people where you have to kind of say, I'm going to do this. So
my personal take on that would be, I mean, you mentioned analysis, and that's a key part, or something that you were doing in your teaching, and sort of analyzing features of various speakers. And I guess if you're doing that, you're not going to stop at the ones that are not part of the lingua franca core. You're going to just consider everything as a whole if you take 12 seconds of a particular speaker. I guess for me, pronunciation teaching starts with listening training, and raising students' awareness of getting in closer to it and trying to identify when the pronunciation deviates from what they might expect. And that's the core of it for me. So I guess this knowledge about which things are a little bit more important in international communication contexts are maybe less in the forefront of my mind. It's more just helping the students discover what the speaker's doing in that context.
Yes. And as you said, and as I said earlier on, I think training people to be able to listen analytically is a really key skill in all of this. They need to be able to detect the differences and understand what they are, and but also, I mean, we need our learners to develop accommodation skills. And I've got a frog in my throat now. We need them to be able to be willing to speak again if they're not understood, because sometimes that can just close you down if you're not understood. We need them to move more towards the person they're having the conversation with, and listening skills are going to help them with that. Accommodation skills and so on. So there's a range of things that we need to teach that are part of pronunciation that I think some people don't realise they're part of pronunciation. So it's easy to sort of pick a syllabus and say, we're doing this and I'm just going to teach you how to do that. But without, as you say, listening skills, which are so important, we need to be able to have our learners hear differences. However, we're going to train them to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to come and talk to you about music, I think, a little bit later. But first, a question about the work that you did in Hong Kong. In Australia, I taught various Asian students from Japan, Thailand, a couple from Hong Kong. But the L1 influences there are quite a big mystery for me in general, particularly for speakers, the Cantonese speakers. What were some of the key takeaways from the research, the work that you did studying intonation in Hong Kong English?
So I was looking at speech rhythm, and I was working at a time when there was other work going on, also looking at speech rhythm, which was adopting a different kind of paradigm. And that paradigm is the one that has kind of taken over. And that's the pairwise variability index, where you compare the durations of successive syllables to see basically what the standard deviation is. And this is kind of premised on the notion that there are types of languages which are syllable timed and types of languages which are stress timed, and that there's a continuum. And, whether you subscribe to that or not, we can certainly see rhythmic differences in different varieties of English. And one of the reasons I wanted to look at it is because if speakers are using speech rhythm differently, then this can have an effect on whether or not people understand them, because you expect a language to adhere to a certain kind of rhythm, whether you realize you're doing this or not. And if things are not highlighted or backgrounded enough, if you've got the sort of speech rhythm that my variety of English has, for example, where we've got more stress timing, so the stress syllables tend to stand out for various reasons, louder, longer, etc. Those sorts of things. If you don't get that sound from another speaker, if there's not the sort of backgrounding that we get, that I remember Julie Gilbert did this really nicely with a little picture with a butterfly, where she sort of had the butterfly in just a line drawing where you could see it. It was black and white against a grey background, and it was really standing out. But if you took away the grey, you can only, it's much more difficult to pick out the butterfly. So it's a kind of perceptual thing, but that's a visual thing. But she used that as an idea for getting you to understand how that works. So if you're expecting to hear things in a particular way and you hear them in a different way, and they're not foregrounding and backgrounding information in the way that we expect to perceive it, because those are the varieties that we've been used to listening to, then this can disrupt intelligibility. Now, this wasn't something that ended up in the lingua franca core, although making sure that you are highlighting the tonic syllable or the nucleus in an utterance did. So there were elements of it that did, but speech rhythm itself didn't end up in the lingua franca core. But I was just, this thing was a PhD. You've got to do these and get them out the way if you want to teach at universities. So I had to do something. And originally I wasn't going to be working on that at all. I was in the UK and I was going to be working on intonation and emotional speech. That was where I was going originally. Okay. And when I moved to Hong Kong, I just didn't have access to the equipment that I needed to do that research. Okay. So there was a discussion about what I should change to. Unfortunately, I hadn't been doing it for very long. I hadn't kind of got too much into the PhD. So I changed to look at speech rhythm because I could hear it was very different. So I didn't adopt the pairwise variability index because it was being developed at the time that I was doing my PhD. And what I did instead was I did it in a way that I think makes more sense to teachers, because if teachers are considering the pairwise variability index, it's a mathematical equation, and I don't mind how often you explain that to teachers. It can be very difficult to get your head around, but with my method, I broke it down into weak syllables, unstressed syllables, stressed syllables, and tonic syllables or nuclear syllables, and I measured those. So I labelled all of the speech that I had from Hong Kong speakers doing a particular sort of thing, and then I had a British corpus for comparison, and I measured those things to see what the difference was, and I found that there was less difference in the duration of those syllables in Hong Kong English than there was in British English. And it was a pedagogical motivation for this. So it was saying, okay, so now teachers can understand this because I can show them in a graphic the difference. And also measuring syllable duration is reasonably easy to get your head around. And I know that the pairwise variability index does that too. But all you need to do is sort of this sort of thing, and then you can average it out. You can look at slight differences, and you can see that there is actually a difference going on there that you can then understand, because when we're teaching intonation and so on, we teach about weak syllables, unstressed syllables, stressed syllables, and tonic syllables. So it sort of makes sense from that point of view. So that's why I did it. But yes, as I say, research is not really my thing. I was very happy to get it done and move on to something else. And, I have worked on other research in speech rhythm and intonation and so on since then.
So you've definitely been more a teacher in your career than an academic. Much
more interested in that, yes, yeah.
So I guess we're tying it back to teaching. There are languages that don't have the same stress patterns that we have. And do you find it very difficult to learn and or teach for teachers to help students understand these stress patterns? I mean, it's in my teaching, I don't see it to be too difficult to say, okay, help me identify the strongest syllable in this utterance. But still, it takes a long time before people are able to adopt it in a natural way and start using it in their own speech, right? So, yeah.
So I'm not in a position where I'm doing any pronunciation teaching at the moment. I don't do any of that at all. I teach English phonetics and phonology. Yeah. So I teach students about how Southern Standard British English basically works. And I teach them that in order that they can compare that with other varieties, should they wish to research them. With the master's students who are mostly doing TESOL, there is more discussion about differences with other languages and, getting them to think about their own language background and assuming I know anything about their language backgrounds, then saying, this language variety is this sort of thing. And so you may find some differences there and getting them to think about. So when we look at syllable structure, talking about different languages having different kinds of structures and looking at different structures and getting them to think about it. But I don't train teachers to teach pronunciation and I don't teach pronunciation. So I equip people with close analytical skills and the understanding of English so that they can then take that into their work. And occasionally I get master students who want to do pronunciation dissertations, not very often, but I do get them. And in that case, you get the opportunity to work more closely with that student, normally on something to do with classroom-based teaching or, thinking about materials development or that sort of thing. And that's when I get the opportunity to do that. But currently I'm not doing any pronunciation training as such.
So in British English teaching materials and also Australian English to some extent, there's a standardization of these RP symbols and a lot of the course books. In the US, they don't have the same kind of consensus in their teaching materials for which phonetic symbols will be used to represent certain sounds. Jeff Lindsay, who I believe you've worked with on the phonetics summer course at University College London, he's proposed these alternative symbols. And in a lot of cases, I can see the logic in that. And in words like cooperation and for me, there's also at the end of a word like to, there's a clear word sound at the end of it. How do you feel about the standardized RP symbols today in that landscape?
The main problem with them, and I would say this was mostly for vowels, is that they no longer represent the way that, let's say, Southern Standard British English certainly sounds. They don't represent that anymore. And on the one hand, you could say, well, they're phoneme symbols, so it doesn't matter because we choose a phoneme to represent a group of sounds so we choose the phoneme that looks like, the ash one. We choose that for the trap vowel, but my trap vowel is much more open than that, and probably a little bit central, and yours might be a little higher, and if you get to New Zealand it's higher still, so you've got these differences with the vowel, and that there's a mismatch between, do we go with these symbols because they are phonemes, or do we have to say they just are not fit for purpose anymore, mostly the vowel sounds, and change them? So in British English materials, probably until the cat amongst the pigeons here, the Oxford Pronouncing Dictionary came along, because the Longman Dictionary done by John Wells and the Cambridge Dictionary done by Peter Roach and myself and now John Esling, we have stuck to the same symbol set, and it's mostly that symbol set that you will see in a large number of pronunciation materials that were produced through the 80s and so on. So things like I'm trying to think of an example now. Adrian Underhill, for example, used it in his materials. Most of them use that. So you pretty much knew, if you opened up any reference book, that it would have this set of symbols and they would be the same. The Oxford Pronouncing Dictionary decided to use some different symbols for some of the vowel sounds. And I'd get students saying to me, well, this is a different vowel. And I'd say, no, they're using that symbol to represent that meaning unit, that phoneme sound. So you've got this issue of, what do you do? Do you stick with something that's coherent so that everybody, when they pick up the materials, knows exactly what sound that is supposed to represent from a meaning unit point of view? Or do you say, well, we've got to make some changes because the vowels have just changed so much? So, for example, using a monophthong for the square vowel, air. I mean, I've got air. I don't say air. I wouldn't say square, bear. I say square, bear, that sort of thing. And the majority of speakers of Southern Standard British English do this. So that's been a change that has, I think Gimpson uses it, that Cruttenden uses it in the revisions of Gimpson, and that's kind of been accepted largely. It's in other phonetics and phonology, English phonetics and phonology textbooks. But just that change, that one change, it took a lot of time for us to decide to do that. And I mean, I'd like to change the ash symbol to the cardinal vowel A symbol. I'm not cardinal vowel 4. Sorry, I'm not saying it's cardinal vowel 4, but it's got much closer to cardinal vowel 4 than it did when it was the RP sound that it was based on in the first place. But in doing this, you kind of fall into this disarray. With the American system, my understanding is that it was never motivated by a group of American phoneticians saying we're going to represent it this way. It was motivated by publishers adopting their own practices. So sometimes you see a diphthong, for example, like I, written with a cardinal vowel 4 symbol, and then the Y cardinal vowel 9, which is the Y. Sometimes you see it written with a yod, sometimes with a kip vowel, So you get these different sorts of ways of writing it down, and consonants as well also had some differences. So you get the C wedge and the S wedge instead of ch and sh. You'd get that sort of thing, and you did see this historically coming up in British materials, but it seemed to get some kind of standardization. I couldn't tell exactly when it was, but certainly by the 80s you had it. So we've got this issue of saying, do we stick with a system so that everybody knows we're talking about this sound? Or do we tweak it? And do we all agree that we're going to tweak it? And that's just impossible. It's just impossible. So looking at the way that Jeff Lindsay has represented it in the Cube Dictionary, for example, I think it's entirely logical to represent it that way. It is extremely different from any of the British materials. It's ELT materials. It's just very different. So it's a bit like there's a group that used to be called the Simplified Spelling Society, and I think now they're called the English Spelling Society, and they've said we need to make this change, and we're saying, well, okay, but you'd need to make this massive holistic change across all the materials, and then what do we do about the historical stuff? So it's a problem, and I don't have an answer for it, quite frankly, because I think, I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have said, well, no, we need to stick with a symbol set because it just makes sense. And if you have a different symbol for something, people think it's the different phoneme. But actually, the vowels have moved around enough for that not to make any sense now. But how you actually deal with that in a cohesive way, I don't know. So I always say to students, when you pick up a textbook, look at what the list of symbols is at the beginning and understand that this doesn't mean it is a different sound. It means that this is the symbol they are using to represent that group of sounds. But it still doesn't help necessarily.
It's kind of confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, do we stick with a symbol set that's no longer fit for purpose, particularly for vowel sounds because the vowels have changed so much? Or do we move on to something else? And evidently we haven't all agreed to do this because there are now, British English pronunciation, the symbol sets are diversifying. So it's a tricky one. But I don't think we can say that any of the sets are not logical, depending on how you're looking at what the logic is. And I've had discussions with other phoneticians who have said, well, just keep the ash symbol, that one, because it's the trap vowel. We don't need to change it because it's representing a phoneme.
But it's more like an E sound, right? So it's more like an air.
It's an air, yes. Yeah. Which, I mean, the dress vowel in British English has got so open. The speakers younger than me, rather than saying dress, I mean, I hear dress, my dress, which is, I mean, that's more like the ash sound. It's really opening, and so we're using the small letter E. Should we be using epsilon in order to, but how far do you go down that route? It's a real conundrum, I think. So anyway, I'm currently writing a phonetics and phonology book. I won't say anything more about it. Don't know how much I'm supposed to say, but I'm kind of wrestling with this with symbol sets, and I've changed a symbol, and I'm thinking, this isn't sitting well with me, but I just don't feel happy with it being this symbol anymore. It's hard. It really is difficult.
I personally,
so I don't have an answer.
I like the vowels that have the glides at the end, the w and the y, because then it opens the door or leads to students maybe asking themselves about how the words are linked together, and it's there in the spelling, and they can see it.
Yeah, I mean, from a phonetics point of view, I would not put a linking w or a linking y in, because you get it naturally if you have these close vowels and you're going to an open vowel. You just get it. You don't have to insert it. It's not like an R sound in British English, which we insert. We have linking an intrusive R. I don't say an R at the end of car, but if I say car and bus, then I'm going to say the R. And in that case, you have to put it in. But if I say, I'm trying to think of an example, give me a linking y example.
I am.
I am. I mean, you kind of do the glide naturally, whether you stick it in there or not. It's in there. From a phonology point of view, putting what would be regarded as a consonantal end at the end of a vowel is making a statement about the phonology of that language. And in English, I can end a syllable with a diphthong, but I can also end it with other consonants. So phonologically, it's operating very differently from languages where I can either have a consonant or I can have that glide element. So, you're sort of saying, how far am I getting down the theoretical phonology end of things with this? But yeah, I mean, also it can, if it helps to think of it from when I say cow, for example, cow, I don't think of that as having a w at the end. There's one in the spelling, but I'm not saying cow. I'm not doing that. So for me, there is no w. But like in the Matrix, there is no spoon. But we can add the w in if I'm saying 2 and 3, for example, 2 and 3. But I would naturally go from oo to by opening my mouth, so I get the glide anyway. But from an ELT point of view, I can see the reason to putting it in, and I would use it if I was teaching things and I wanted students to sound smoother. Then there's no reason for not including it in those sorts of pronunciation materials.
Okay.
Phonetically, I don't think it makes much sense, but yeah, so that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. We'll move on. You've written this book. Your Voice Speaks Volumes, which is obviously, it's for a mainstream audience, a more popular book, and away from teacher specifics or students at the university. That must have been really, really fascinating for you. So not only doing the analysis, as you said, you've done in the research for your PhD and taking a phonetician's analytic sort of standpoint, but then connecting it to social associations with accent. And how was that experience for you? It must have been very, very exciting to start researching that stuff as well.
Yeah, it was a book that I'd wanted to write for a long time, and I didn't know how to get a publisher to allow me to write it. So I have to thank David Crystal for asking his publisher to talk to me about this and then agree to take it on. I will say that if anybody has the hardback copy, there is a really unpleasant error on page 14, which I'm not going to tell you about, but you'll probably spot it.
Okay.
On page 14 of the hardback. So get the paper back because we made a correction.
Okay.
But yes, quite an embarrassing error. I'm sure if anybody's read it and spotted the error, they'll know what I mean. But it was just something that we totally missed in proofreading. Anyway. But I wanted to write something about how speech is relevant to the outside world, and because people kind of think of phonetics as this ivory tower thing or My Fair Lady or something like that, and it's very sort of highfalutin, but actually it's all around, whether we're thinking about accent identity, pronunciation, or whether we're thinking about just generally communicatively, we change the way that we speak in different environments. We've got people who wish to represent themselves through their voices in ways which are different depending on whether they're doing a different job. So if they're kind of, just chatting with a friend, or they're on the radio, or they're singing, or, different sorts of styles of singing fitting into genres. I actually wrote an article for Babel magazine. Is it this one? About, there we go. So this is Babel magazine. I write a column regularly called "Giving Voice a Voice," and I wrote one about some research that was recently done on this lady here.
Yeah. Taylor Swift.
Because Taylor Swift changed the way that she spoke when she moved from, I think it was Philadelphia originally, to Nashville, because she wanted to be a country star.
So her regular speaking voice, not her singing voice.
She changed her regular speaking voice to sound more country, and of course, the singing style is like that too. So we get, and then she moved to New York, and her speech has changed again. And I didn't do the research, but I'm just kind of did an article talking people through the research itself. And it's all about identity, where you feel you want to belong at that particular time. You might have financial motivations for this. You might have gender related reasons for wanting to do this. You might, there's all sorts of reasons why you might want your voice to sound a particular way, or you might not realize that you're being perceived in a particular way. And there's also a chapter which is a very light one on forensic speaker comparison and voice lineups and things like that. So how the voice can be used as evidence in a court of law. So the speech is something that we just do it so naturally without thinking about it. But actually, other people are thinking about it. The minute you say something, other people are thinking about you, judging you for the way you speak. And as you know, I have to go to an event shortly at the university, and it's about working class identities. And my background is very working class. My parents were strongly working class, and I'm not working class now. I'm definitely middle class. But the fact that, this goes back to my dad, that the fact that I'm in this position may well have been helped by the way that I speak. It might have been. There's a good chance that is. And I know when when I was working at Leeds University, we had a lecturer who was from Birmingham, I think it was. And I had a conversation with him where he said that the students don't take me seriously because I have this Birmingham accent. And I just thought it was astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was astonishing, but people just have attitudes to these things. And all of that stuff just kind of gets you interested in this and pointing this out to people, the accent biases that we have, the prejudices, the way it's perpetuated by the media. All of this stuff. I wanted people to be able to think about this, read the book and think about it and examine their own thoughts and, unconscious biases about the way people speak. So that was my motivation for writing it. I
think I have you for another few more minutes, don't I? 3 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah. So I came across a video of you singing in a rock band, and that was, I thought to myself, another pronunciation expert who has a musical background, how wonderful. And then I came across the Happy song. Could you tell us about that?
So the Happy Val song, this is something that comes out of the summer course in English phonetics.
Right.
And we have a part, well, when it was 2 weeks in London, and it hasn't been, sadly, since COVID, the last one we did, the 2 weeks in London, was in 2019, I think. And that was, and that was their 100th anniversary of the summer course in English phonetics as well. But we used to do 2 weeks in London, and then there'd be a party at the end, and we would sing songs. And we now do a week online and a week in London, and we do some songs, but not quite to the same extent. And it was not exactly a competition, but the teachers would alter songs and add in words about phonetics, and that there are some fabulous ones out there. There was somebody that did one teacher did something to the song Yesterday, and it has a line that goes, "Fricatives, there are more than 20 fricatives, and I think there is no language which requires this many fricatives." That sort of thing. Silly songs. And there's a great one using Happy Together, where it goes, "Imagine E and oo, I do. I tried to get them sounding right the whole fortnight," etc. That kind of thing. So one of the lecturers, one of the tutors on the course was Tim Wharton, and he's a musician as well. He used to go out under Tim Cody. I'm not sure if he still does, but he's also a musician, and we were talking about the Happy Val, and then the Happy song came along, and we said, we've got to alter the lyrics of this because it's just made for it. So I think I think we wrote different bits of it. So one of us wrote the verses and one wrote the chorus. I can't remember how it came along, but we changed it. And we did that together, and then and I just thought this was a bit of fun. So we sang it with the students on the summer course, and then I found that there was a karaoke type track on YouTube, so I made a video of it. So you can, if you look me up on YouTube, you can find me singing the Happy Val song, and you can join in with lyrics. And there are a few other things on there which have got sort of backings, done like a karaoke sort of thing. But so it was a bit of a giggle. But people find it on occasion and then email me about it, which is always fun. But it was the Happy Val. So it kind of talks about using it and how it works, and then we've got lexical sets and so on. So it's fun. But I've been a vocalist definitely since school. My parents used to stick me on the stage next to the piano in the Royal British Legion when I was a child. So it's always been something that I've done. And so I'm also a classic rock singer. I'm not sure if there's any videos on my YouTube channel of that, but there's certainly some around. Yeah,
it was on a different YouTube channel, I think, that I came across. But it was great. It was, All right, Jane, I believe you have to go. So thank you very much for the time today. It's been really wonderful for me and a pleasure to chat to you, and great for the PronSIG community to have an opportunity to listen to this talk as well, or this interview. So thanks very much, and have a fantastic afternoon.
You're very welcome, and happy anniversary to the PronSIG. I'm proud to have been involved with it, and I'm absolutely delighted that it's doing so well now.
All right, great. Thanks very much, Jane. See you later.
That's it. Thank you very much for listening to the end of this podcast and this interview with Jane Setter. Be sure to keep an eye out for the next episodes where we interview more exciting speakers. For information about our upcoming events, head to pronsig.iatefl.org. We would love to see you at one very soon. Until next time, bye.